Welcome to Musing, music, conversation, and inspiration for the adventurous listener here on CJSW 90.9 FM in Calgary. My name is Janna Sailor, and it is my great pleasure to be your guide on this deep dive into contemporary Canadian music. Right now we are listening to Klezmer Dances II, composed by Daniel Pelton and performed by the Daniel Pelton Collective. I'll be chatting with Daniel and company in just a moment, but for now, let's listen in. So today on Musing, I have the absolute privilege of interviewing composer, creator, improviser, saxophonist, and band leader extraordinaire Daniel Pelton. Daniel, welcome to Musing. So glad to have you here.
So happy to be here. Thank you so much for all of those honorifics.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Like I said, when I think of you, those are the things I think of. You are just on the cusp of releasing your latest project entitled Violins of Hope with your ensemble, the Daniel Pelton Collective. And this is a very significant project. In many ways, it's much more than a project. It's life work. Can you tell us the significance of it to you personally and how it came to be?
Absolutely. So the Violins of Hope album that we're putting out is recorded with instruments from the touring Violins of Hope collection, which is a collection of violins and I believe a couple of violas and a cello that are actually recovered from concentration camps or belong to victims of the Nazis who left them with family before they were taken off to the camps, or people who just happened to inherit them and they made their way around the world. And these two Jewish, a father and son team, kind of started this collection of instruments post-Holocaust, and they're both violin makers, and they've kind of restored them to a certain extent, ones that are playable and ones that are not. They've kind of left as artifacts, as kind of legacies of their owners, and a kind of living memorial to the Holocaust and its victims.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. And so how did this recording project come about? And how did you avail yourself of being able to work with these instruments?
Yeah. So the Violins of Hope exhibit was staying at the National Music Center here in Calgary for a number of months. And as part of its stay, the National Music Center actually hosted an artist residency with the instruments. And so there was a whole application process. And totally coincidentally, like years earlier during my time as composer in residence with the Calgary Public Library, I had written a chamber orchestra piece using Holocaust survivor tattoos as pitch sets. And so when this opportunity came around, I was like, I have the perfect project for this. And so I submitted and I got it.
So that's amazing.
Yep.
And this album is a result of that collaboration between NMC, Violins of Hope, and the Daniel Pelton Collective.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you personally to have this opportunity to embark on something so significant, like bringing all these elements together and then releasing them to the masses?
It's very surreal. Personally, it was very moving. I am Jewish, so I do have that family history, and I do have family that died in the camps, and I have all the stories of, I would have been in Europe, but obviously not an option, and so my family came over here. And so it was a big deal for me, and it was a very big deal for my family. They were all very excited, and it kind of sparked a little investigation into our history, and we kind of learned like who went where in the war and all of that. So personally, it was very cool. And then, of course, just the opportunity to work with the instruments and to create music is a whole other kind of cool that I'm always very happy to partake in.
So we are joined by two of the musicians that performed on those instruments and brought this music to life. This was a collaboration that also brought members of the Kensington Sinfonia into the Daniel Pelton Collective. And we're welcoming co-artistic directors, cellist Andrea Case and violinist Genevieve Micheletti to the show. Welcome. So glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Hi, we're so excited.
Now, this is a beautiful, beautiful project. And as string players, I was thinking about this last night. We play on instruments that often come with stories and decades of history, and if we're lucky, centuries, centuries old. Cue red violin music. But this is so that kind of storied history to instruments is nothing new to us. It kind of comes with the territory of playing on string instruments. But what was it like to have this opportunity to play on these instruments, to live with these instruments over the course of working on this project?
Well, this was really actually pretty fascinating when you think about the life of a musical instrument and what it goes through as it starts as a growing thing. It's made out of wood. And you think about how these instruments came to this collection, and it feels like really big and important. I'm the cellist in this particular collaboration, and there's actually only one cello of Hope. So there's lots of violins. Violins are much more portable. They also tend to survive things for longer because they're smaller. And the one cello of Hope is a really beautiful instrument. It's got a deep resonant bass sound. It's a really thick bottom. And just like thinking about while I was playing it, how it managed to survive this huge event was really meaningful. And it's like now, because the instruments are traveling all around the world, it's also who else has gotten to play this instrument and bring it back to life in this way. And it's not just me. It's, Arnold Choi, who's the first chair of the CPO, was playing on it the week before we had it. And it will go on through the whole world, having all of these extra kind of hopefully loving hands really get to play on it. And that's really, really cool. So the Violins of Hope, I'll let Jen talk to, because, it's a little bit of a different thing. But the one cello of Hope, I feel like is really unique and special and a beautiful instrument just in its own right. But then it has this incredibly important history.
Do you know much about the instrument's previous owner or where it came from?
No, I didn't get to go that far in depth, but the label I think is out of the inside, so it's a little bit hard to know more about it. Other than it's obviously well made and has been sustained through a long time. Just also the shape of it is kind of really unusual. It looks more like a double bass, if you know, kind of it's got a little bit of a slopey shoulder and then this big kind of fat bottom. I call it my fat bottom girl, and I loved her. So, it's a different feel when you're playing it. So it must have a history. I'm sure that they've got some, papers and stuff, but we didn't get that in depth, but it's a really beautiful sounding cello. Yeah.
And Jen, you got to play on a violin.
Oh, they were beautiful. Yeah. They had we actually used a special klezmer violin that had mother of pearl inlay all over the edges. I think as performers, often when we get on stage, we feel as if everything depends on that performance, and it's really humbling to actually hold in your hands something where their life did depend on that performance, right? And I think musical instruments are so unique because they're meant to be played, and if they're not played, they degrade, almost like humans, right? They're our partners. They're often something that we feel as strong an attachment to as a friend. They go through everything with us. So it's an honor for someone else to let me borrow almost a piece of their soul.
Absolutely. Yeah, we develop such close bonds to the instruments that we spend hours and hours and pour our lives into. Yeah, so you can only imagine where it came from and the lifetimes that it had prior to this. That's incredible. I feel like it's almost like, music has this ability to, reach past and into the past and into generations, and that's it's such a beautiful way to knit together our histories as musicians, as artists, as creators.
Yeah, it's a different kind of like a family tree feeling when you have someone else's instruments in your hand. You're like, it's that feeling that you're a part of something different. I mean, with your own instrument as well. Like every time I open it up, I say hello to it like it's a human, right? And that it has a real soul. And I think that these instruments in this collection have even more of that kind of aura of being soulful.
Incredible, yeah. What is the significance to you personally as musicians, getting the chance to be a part of a project like this and perform these original compositions written especially for these instruments and especially for this group of people? That's one of the most rewarding things for me personally, is to be able to bring music to life that's never been played before. While this project has like an old soul while being new. Tell me about your own experience of bringing this music to life.
It's so interesting, because most of the concerts we do, they can be replicated elsewhere. We play the same repertoire over and over, the Beethoven symphonies, but to do something that's so new, and when you have the composer in the room, we can throw things back and forth with Daniel. Sometimes he shuts me down, rightfully
Jen
so.
loves throwing things at me.
I do.
But is it tossed or lobbed? Yeah.
I mean, I like to think of it as lovingly lobbed. Often I think he thinks it's a speedball with ill intent. But it's an incredible feeling to feel like this is something that you really crafted and created. And it makes me feel a lot of connection with musicians in the past, because, we think of, like, for example, the Haydn quartets are these beautiful works. Everyone has to play one. They're things that you play if you do any sort of quartet competition or quartet training. But back in the day, that they were only played at Esterhazy, like on the estate, right? And so I'm sure that the cook, who also doubled as a second violin or whatever, just crafted it in his own ways. I'm sure he had to make modifications, right? And so it feels more like a living, breathing document, I guess, than it does just notes on a page.
Yeah, love that.
We get to work with a lot of composers with Kensington Sinfonia, and one of the joys, I think, of this particular project is it went down on an album right away, which means that it's like it's archival in a beautiful way, in that we hadn't really gotten to perform it yet. We hadn't really gotten to make it into something new. It's really hopefully what Daniel had thought of as its kind of really true form. Often with the repertoire that we live with over and over again, like Beethoven that Genevieve was talking about, we can have 75, 80, 90 different versions that we like of it. If you go onto Spotify or whatever and you look at a Beethoven string quartet, there are so many recordings. But these pieces, this is like primo. This is number one. It's never been done before. The first time you turn it on, you're hearing that original kind of thought process, hopefully, of Daniel's that we were able to interpret. And nobody else has done that. And I think for these instruments, that's a beautiful kind of connection into the future, is we're still making music on them. We're still performing on them. They still live, and they live in music that's just been written by people who are really thoughtful about it, and people who are really trying to move the future of classical music forward. And that's super exciting.
Absolutely. So Daniel, as a composer and also the ensemble leader, you were taking your collective of musicians through this project. What kinds of things did you say to them to prepare this music? And what did you say to them when you were in the studio, and about the essence of it and what you wanted to come across?
I really don't think I had to say too much. I think everybody was like very aware of the kind of solemnity and importance of the project and what we were doing, while also being able to have some fun with it and really dive into it. Yeah, weird juxtaposition, but if you're not having fun with it, then it's not very fun.
If we don't bring joy to it, why we're not honoring the ancestors that held these instruments.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
But they were a great group of people. What I enjoy about what I've done with the Daniel Pelton Collective, what I like about this thing I've named after myself that I do.
He says modestly.
Yeah. But like each time I put a project together, it's kind of a different ensemble, and sometimes I'm playing in it and sometimes I'm not. But just kind of the versatility of what's happening is really cool, and the talented people that I've managed to attract is very, very moving for me. And so just the ability to kind of trust the musicians as I hand off the charts to them and to hear what they bring to it is always exciting, and I always learn something, and something always happens that I didn't think of, or Jen says something that should happen that I hadn't thought of, and it grows.
Were there any kind of surprises or realizations that you had as you were hearing your music realized kind of and come alive for the first time with real people performing it?
I think the big thing that we came across just from a recording standpoint is the ensemble, for the most part, for these recordings is chamber orchestra of like strings and saxophone section and brass section and drum kit. And so in the recording studio, we kind of realized with the strings, and in rehearsal, we realized with the strings that like they just didn't have the body to stand up to like a full brass section plus saxophones and drum kit. And so there was kind of learning to layer the string recordings.
You can work magic in the studio.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you're actually hearing 3 times or more the number of Violins of Hope on the recordings.
Yeah, they used to do that all the time. And if you think of like old Hollywood scores, you had these big bands with the string sections in front, but the string sections were really big, right? And needing to be so big just to stand up to the amount of sound that, say, a Barry sax can pump out is just not the same as a teeny tiny wooden violin, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have to be a little bit crafty, and I think that it's really fun that we have the technology to do that so well and to make it possible. It's really cool.
And so when I hear your music, Daniel, I hear a lot of I would say kind of old school influences in your writing. Is that correct? Can you tell me about some of your aesthetic and perhaps experiential influences that find their way into your writing?
Can you tell me what you mean by old school?
Well, just kind of that big band. There's this essence of that big band flavor that I love.
Glenn Miller Band.
Yeah.
And well, Klezmer, we'll touch on that in a moment. And kind of almost like a folk song kind of essence to it. I find very poignant. But I mean, I don't mean to tell you what your influences are, but it's just what I heard.
It's all right. We've told him a lot of times. Like, this sounds like Mio. This sounds like Bach.
I think as a saxophone player, you guys were speaking earlier about how your instruments, the violins, can have centuries of history behind them. And as a saxophone player, you know, if I have 50 or 60 years of history on a horn, that's like very ancient for my instrument. And as a saxophone player, to be in the position of Violins of Hope artist in residence but not be a violinist was kind of an interesting juxtaposition for me. Obviously, when you play the saxophone, you have to be familiar with the world of jazz or else you're never going to work. And I love jazz, so that's great for me. And a lot of that seeps into my music. I don't think that I think in like genre binaries too much. I'm never like, oh, this is a string quartet, so it has to be classical or it has to follow these rules. I'm kind of like, anything is possible anywhere, and if it serves the piece or if you think it's fun, then it's worth trying.
Nice. Yeah, the element of experimentation and kind of storytelling, I always find to be really prominent in your work.
Thank you.
So let's dive into the album itself. Speaking of storytelling, because there's a very clear kind of a narrative arc, which I love. It starts with Klezmer Dance II. Yeah. Can you let's dive into that one?
Yeah. So it's Klezmer Dance II. I did the first Klezmer Dances piece for actually the Instrumental Society concert that you hired me for.
That was a great time.
Yeah. And so I had one chamber orchestra piece kind of written, ready to go when I applied for the Violins of Hope thing. And then when I got it, the National Music Center team and the musicians and even myself were like, okay, we have like one piece. Is it possible to record more? Can we make like an album out of this? And I thought, yeah, that's probably a good idea. And I obviously wanted something that featured the strings from Violins of Hope. I wanted a string feature so that people could really hear the instruments and the instruments would have a chance to shine. And so I thought a klezmer string quartet would obviously be a thing to do. And it's not like strictly klezmer, of course, when you listen to it. But kind of those klezmer motives. And then my favorite string quartets, one of them has to be the Shostakovich No. 8 string quartet, just for the drama of it. I don't think there's another piece out there that sounds quite like it. And the Shostakovich also shares that kind of World War II inspiration because it's from the Dresden fire bombings that he got that inspiration. And so I was kind of combining a little of that post-war drama with the klezmer folk elements and putting it together.
So kind of I would say the centerpiece, the kind of the heart of the project is the second piece on the program. And I'm not going to try to read out the numbers because my ADHD dyslexic brain will just make a mess of it.
Do you have it memorized?
But it's the title is a set of prisoner tattoo numbers. And this is, by far the longest and most, involved piece on the project. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so the origins of this piece actually go back to the winter of 2019 going into 2020 is kind of when it started. And earlier in the year, I had been majorly dumped. Very dramatically, super dumped.
Oh boy!
Yeah,
the plot thickens.
Yes. And so I was going into kind of my first winter alone in several years.
Dan's winter of discontent.
Yes,
Gonna freeze to death.
And I was kind of like, let's really like experience this. Let's really wallow in it, and like let's start reading Holocaust books.
Oh, that's dark.
Yeah,
Joyful.
Yeah.
If they can make it through that,
Yeah.
That's right.
don't
That's
throw
right.
that in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I read the Tattooist of Auschwitz, which had recently come out, and like Jen said, if they can make it through it, then I can. I had two realizations after finishing it, which was like, wow, am I sure lucky that these are the problems that I have. And also, like, how did this guy get a girlfriend in like the literal worst time and place for him to be alive?
Right.
And
You have no
I'm
excuse.
single.
Right.
You're not trying hard enough.
Yeah, but just for those who aren't aware, the story in The Tattooist of Auschwitz is about Lally Sokolov and Guido Furman, who were both Jews sent to the death camp. And Lally, because he knew so many European languages, was deemed valuable enough to be the person who tattooed inmates upon their arrival because he could speak to all of them. And then one day while he was doing that, he tattooed the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen in his whole life, according to him. And he decided that he was going to live through his ordeal and make sure that she lived through her ordeal. And long story short, they did, and they got married. And so I was quite moved after reading their story. And I thought, I'm a musician and I'm Jewish and I have something to say about this and feel about this. And I have a very clear memory of sitting at my keyboard in like the middle of the night and thinking like, how do you get the music out of this? And then thinking about my 12-tone theory harmony classes with Alan Gordon Bell, how you get music out of numbers. And so I took their tattoos, which are 34902 and 32407. And it turns out that makes a perfect call and response A minor blues motive. Ba-da-ba-ba-da, and so you put a little swing on it, and I thought, wow, that is quite profound given the relationship of the people, and their tattoos share this musical relationship. And then using that as a starting point, I used those numbers as a pitch set to kind of get as much expression as possible out of the numbers. Because the Nazis gave us those numbers as a way of like, you don't have a name, you're not a person, you're a number, and we will do with you as we will. And so I thought if I could prove that even with those numbers, you can get this whole range of human emotion and experience, that it would be a bit of a reclamation.
That's incredible. A way to, make something very, very tragic and into art. I think that's one of our superpowers as artists, as musicians, is that we have this ability to transform anything almost. And the result is, I found it very, very haunting, very almost diabolical. This movement. Tell me about kind of the process of writing it and what you're, what you're wanting to portray and to the listeners.
Yeah, I have kind of like the call and response mode of the ba-da-ba-ba-da, da-da-da-da-da, to me kind of represents the two people and their relationship, and then just kind of setting that against all of the experiences that they had. And so some of that is very dark, it's very twisted, there's a lot of dissonant, discordant harmonies and rhythms that happen that obviously represent the more horrific elements. But then there's also a lot of moments of more calm for, obviously their lives were not all terrible and their experiences together were not all bad. And something very beautiful did come out of it. So there are moments that represent that with kind of more spaced out, more consonant, kind of almost folky melodies. And then a big jazz trumpet solo.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that bit. It was like it's almost like a ray of sunshine. Like it cut through everything, and everything's going to be okay. And was that something that was something like that you were going for?
Yeah, and just kind of thinking in the broader sense of things, like a lot of the more fascist, imperial, corrupt governments, one of the first things they do for some reason is like, jazz is bad.
Right.
And I'm not sure why that is or what that is.
It makes people happy.
Yeah, Imperial Japan was no jazz. The Soviet Union was not big on jazz. And then Nazi Germany, of course, was not big on jazz. And there's lots of stories. Coco Schumann was a musician imprisoned in one of the camps who was forced to play swing music for his Nazi guards. And so I think there's just a very interesting, like,
juxtaposition.
we're gonna send you to the camps for playing jazz so that we can listen to you play jazz in the camps, kind of thing. And so just kind of like the jazz is like a metaphor for like the freedom to listen to the music you want to listen to, which is not guaranteed, it turns out.
Well, and then that kind of brings us to the final track, which features you and your mad saxophoning.
It does not.
skills.
That's Richard Harding.
That's Richard Harding.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
I do not play on any of this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Should have
good to
taken
know.
the credit.
I could not do that to Rich. Rich is such a beautiful soul. I love him. He's yeah. I could
truly
never do wrong
extraordinary.
by that man.
Yeah. It's because this takes this this jazz thread into this final track, which is your take on the legendary Oscar Peterson's "Hymn to Freedom," which rounds out what is truly a musical journey.
Yeah.
That these three works take us on, and I have to say, when I was preparing for this interview last night, I found it very moving.
Yeah.
And I had a good cry. I had like my cat on one side, I had my dog on one side. Just had a good cry. It reminded me of a little cutout that I used to have in my violin case that says, "We are the music makers. We are the dreamers of dreams," and it just reminded me that. Kind of what we were touched on earlier, that we as artists, we are the ones that can plant those seeds of peace and freedom. And that is something that is so powerful and so profound. And that very much comes across in this album. Tell me about what made you want to incorporate Oscar Peterson's "Hymn to Freedom" into this project?
Yeah. I think building on what I was saying about jazz earlier and kind of how the jazz is a metaphor for freedom musically. And then I think just a very literal, like it's a metaphor for freedom, but also the song is called "Hymn to Freedom" and it's about freedom. And as we're releasing this on the 27th of January to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, to me, it's a very literal, like, hymn to freedom of these people as they escape, hell on earth. And I just, at the end of the day, I really wanted, because, like, the Klezmer Dances quartet has its dark elements to it, and the Holocaust tattoo piece is obviously very dark. And I was like, these instruments should have a chance to just, like, because I think just due to the nature of the collection, they play a lot of like Schindler's List soundtrack. They play a lot of like sad Jewish music, sad World War II music. And obviously that is important to remember, but also something that was just uplifting and just good and just bright, I felt like the instruments deserved a chance to just like have a good time kind of thing. Yeah. Because so many of them, we were talking about the histories of the instruments a little earlier, and Jen was talking about how their owners' lives kind of depended on them at times. And I was unaware before the Violins of Hope exhibit actually came to Calgary, I was unaware that many of the death camps did have orchestras in them. And that a lot of the inmates in these camps, one of the ways that they were more likely to survive was if they were a musician and if they could play in these orchestras. And doing so was often so horrific because you were either playing new arrivals into the camps, which is terrible, or you were being forced to perform for your Nazi guards. Like there was no good way to be there, obviously. And there are many stories of people kind of stumbling out of these camps and being like, take this instrument away from me. Like, I can never touch it again. I've been part of something so horrible that music is no longer something I can do with a clear conscience, and I never want to see this thing again. Which we were talking about our connections to our instruments earlier, to be through an ordeal that like separates you from your music so terribly is obviously horrible. And so I think giving these instruments a chance to just have something that was good for 6 or 7 minutes and just bathe in that for a bit was important.
Yeah. And certainly such a universal message, and one that very evidently we're in need of now as we navigate our current circumstances of so much conflict and turmoil worldwide. Tell me about the significance of the album release date.
Yeah, kind of stumbled upon it just as the timing of the project and the recording and everything, and it was kind of like, oh, like we are coming up to this anniversary, and just thinking about 80 years is not a long time. Like, there are fewer than there were, but we still do have living Holocaust survivors, and it's important to think about, and it's important, like, we are not fundamentally biologically different from people who were alive 80 to 100 years ago. You know, we don't get to point at a Nazi and be like, they are, you know, a totally different being, because they were just people, and their victims were just people. And obviously there's growing trends of anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial across Canada and across the world, and it's something that's just growing. And so I think reminding people that this is something to take seriously, and this is something that did happen and something that could happen again.
Well, and as soon as you start dehumanizing a part of the population, whether it be Muslims or trans people, or, you know, insert any kind of minority group here. Anytime
Alan Bell
you
calls
start,
it the us or them.
right. Anytime you start doing that, I think that as a composer on your part, or as musicians on the part of Jen and I, part of our job is to hold the mirror up and do projects like this when we're like, let's reinvestigate, let's look again, let's bring this up and talk about it, and let's rehumanize what's, you know, these people that were, as you said, just people.
I think the numbers can be overwhelming day to day, and especially the tattoos, it brings us back to know each of those numbers is a person.
So much to say, so much to contemplate. But you know, the music speaks so powerfully on behalf of those people, on behalf of those instruments. Thank you, Daniel, for bringing your music to the world and this project to the world. And thank you, Jen and Andrea, for bringing it to life. And I can't wait for everyone to experience this album. Tell us where and when we will be able to obtain one.
Yeah. January 27th, all online music retailers, no physical copies as of yet, because I don't have any money, but maybe maybe in the future there will be some physical copies to go around. But
You'll have to sell CD players to go with them, though, because
Yeah,
you
that's
don't have those anymore.
You'll have to give away the CD player for free in order to sell the CD.
I would like some vinyls. I think vinyls maybe come back.
That would. I think that this project would really suit vinyls. That's very cool. Thank you again, Daniel, Genevieve, and Andrea, for being my guests here on Musing. And we'll leave it there and listen to some music. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Musing on CJSW 90.9 FM in Calgary. My name is Janna Sailor, and it is such a delight to share music and ideas on this platform. Musing is a production of the Canadian Music Centre Prairie Region and produced on the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 Nations, which include the Siksika, Kainai, Pakainai, Stoney Nakoda, Chiniki, Bears Paw, Goodstoney, and Tsuut'ina Nations, and the Métis Nations 5 and 6. To take us out, here is the Daniel Pelton Collective performing Oscar Peterson's Hymn to Freedom. Thanks for listening, and take care.